Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we're going to flip through the pages of the book titled The Power of Self-Suggestion by Reverend Samuel McComb. I find this to be a very important topic as it deals with, in my opinion, one of the most malleable organs of the human body, the mind. It is my observation, and perhaps you have noticed it as well, that many people can be influenced through either internal or external event. And oddly, some of the most entrenched beliefs are there without even us realizing how and when it lodged itself in there. Yet, like the trickle of water on stone, it sublimely happens. Whatever impression we have allowed to slowly, repeatedly, over time, unbeknown to us, influence our mind. It was the Greek philosopher Socrates that said, "Know thyself," and I believe that is one of the best pastimes any one person can engage in and would have continued curiosity till the very end. Before I get started, I'd like to share some recent articles regarding this topic. In an article in Medium, an online publication, they recently stated that neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to form and reorganize synaptic connections, especially in response to learning or experience, it allows the brain to rewire based on repeated mental input. They added that the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between imagined and actual experiences, and have found that consistent positive thoughts can gradually override negative mental programming. So there's that saying, I don't know who says it, but they say you are what you think, right? In another article separate, but on the same topic, it was put out by Modern Mind Masters. They stated that in recent years, there's a growing interest in research due to the recent revelations of the neural changes occurring during autosuggestive testing. And one of the tests that was conducted showed that perceived pain in the forearm was reduced when the participants imagined a glove covering the forearm. And this was confirmed and measured by the use of an electroencephalograph, EEG machine. Experiments such as these show how self-suggested thoughts can directly influence one's physical status. In this case, simply imagining an injury on the forearm was enough to change the neural activity. Findings such as these arouse great interest in the potential use of autosuggestion to boost physical health and reduce detrimental afflictions, which is what the author will endeavor to explain in this book. Mind you, we humans are so slow to get on the same page. This book was written in 1900, and the information is very digestible by today's recent scientific discoveries. Also, if you find this topic interesting, I do have another book in my playlist by Emile Coué titled Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. Make sure to check it out, and also the links regarding these articles I left in the description of this video. With that, I want to say thank you to my family and my friends, and to fellow subscribers. Welcome back. I really appreciate you. And if you're new to the channel, again, welcome. And now I will flip the page. The Power of Self-Suggestion by Reverend Samuel McComb, Doctor of Divinity. This book is in the public domain. A foreword. The substance of this little book has been given in the form of a lecture. It is now offered to a wider audience in the hope that it may prove useful in helping some to know the power of a larger life. April 1909, Boston. A quote by Vectorsleben. How profound are the sufferings of those unhappy persons who allow their imaginations to become fixed upon some disease which threatens them, or from which they even imagine they already suffer. The physiologist easily explains this fact by informing us that the constant transference of a nervous current into any organ must at last be followed by change in the condition of its nutrition and consequently by disease. And can we doubt that the power capable of plunging man into such deep distress can also render him happy? If we are ill because we believe ourselves to be ill, why should we not have the power of keeping ourselves in health by the firm conviction that we are healthy? End of quote. A quote by Milton: "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." End of quote. The power of self-suggestion. One of the classical methods in modern scientific psychotherapy, and a method which is also unconsciously employed by unscientific healing cults, is that which goes by the name of suggestion. This term is often used in a loose and vague way, even by good writers, to express the method by which one mind influences another, whether the method employed is argument or explanation or an idea offered in some indirect way, either through the personality of him who offers it or by some technical device. The history of the word, however, as well as scientific convenience, indicates that it should be limited in psychotherapeutic usage to the physical and physiological activity of ideas which work not in the clear light of consciousness, but in the subconscious mental region that lies in the shadow. The word suggestion comes from the Latin through the French, and in its passage from one language to the other it took on a metaphorical meaning. The Latin verb meant originally to put something under something else. Then it came to signify in a general way to offer or to provide something. The noun formed from it in French and taken over into English signifies an idea offered in an indirect or subtle manner. Finally, it is used by careful writers on psychotherapy to signify an idea offered not to the conscious but to the subconscious element in mind. When we try to persuade a person or to re-educate his reason or his will, we appeal to conscious, rational processes. The ideas which we would communicate do their work in the clear light of consciousness. When, on the other hand, we suggest to a person, we seek to influence that region of the mind which lies, as it were, below the threshold of consciousness, and which we now know exercises a profound influence on our entire mental and moral life. The agencies by which the influence is exercised are various. Perhaps it is through the spoken word or through a gesture that an idea is communicated. Perhaps it is some form of electricity or mechanical therapeutics. Perhaps it is the subtler power of personality. These are merely the means by which suggestion operates. The essential note of suggestion itself is that it works in a subterranean way in the person influenced by it. We shall do well, then, to reserve the word suggestion for the subconscious and unconscious activities of ideas in us, whether the ideas come from ourselves, autosuggestion, or from others, heterosuggestion. How the subconscious activity works and how it is related to the physiological apparatus of brain and nervous system, we do not know. All we know are simply external, empirical facts. We know that certain ideas offered by another can unlock pent-up energies, remove mental and moral inhibitions, unify disassociated states of consciousness. But as to how these things are done, we must say with Dubois Raymond, ignoramus, and perhaps also ignorabimus. Mysterious as is the power of suggestion when offered by another person, equally mysterious is it when offered by one to oneself. This latter type of suggestion is called auto or self-suggestion. A recent German writer, in the course of this discussion of mind cure procedures, comes to deal with the power of autosuggestion and dismisses it in the spirit of Dean Swift's famous essay on the mountains of Holland, which consisted of one line: "There are no mountains in Holland." According to this scientific authority, autosuggestion is impossible. This is true if by the term is meant an idea created as it were out of nothing through the sheer force of one's own will. But that is not the meaning of the term as used by those who are concerned with the therapeutic value of suggestion. The term is intended rather to express the power of the mind unconsciously to build upon a hint from the outside or upon the erroneous interpretation of a special sensation, a whole morbid superstructure which creates a nervous disorder, and also its power to receive a good suggestion or a hint offered from the outside or in the course of one's own reflections and unconsciously, as in lighter states of sleep, to amplify it and so narrow consciousness upon it that it sets up a healing process. Cure by self-suggestion rests upon the fundamental dogma of modern physiological psychology that mind and body constitute a unity, that for every thought and feeling, however slight, there is a corresponding nervous event. It follows that within limits, as is the mind, so is the body. Our thoughts concerning our bodies are not inert, dead things. They are living forces that tend to find expression in corresponding physical states. This is not a speculation. It is a fact established by abundant observation and experiment. It is the overseeing of this truth and the neglect of the complementary principle of the influence of body and mind that has given birth to the quasi-theosophical mental and spiritual healing systems so rife in our time. But the overemphasis on a true idea need not drive us to a denial of its relative significance and value. Dr. George B. Cotton puts the matter correctly when he says, "However the thought of cure may come into our minds, whether by external or autosuggestion, if it is firmly rooted so as to impress the subconscious, that part of the mind which rules the bodily organs, a tendency toward cure is at once set up and continues as long as that thought has the ascendancy." We all know from experience the power of self-suggestion to originate morbid conditions. The heart beats automatically, but some night, laying awake, we become conscious of its strokes. Should some slight pain in the region of the heart supervene at that time, we may, if we are suggestible, leap irrationally to the idea that we are suffering from heart disease, and this erroneous notion will serve to increase the slight functional irregularity through automatic repetition of the idea. In psychological terms, we are here building up either subconsciously or unconsciously an abnormal instead of a normal complex of ideas. A good illustration of this process is afforded by the case of a gentleman who called upon me recently to get some advice as to the method of regaining his self-control. It appears that he had been reading Professor Percival Lowell's lectures on the conditions of life in Mars, and he had been profoundly impressed by the fact that in that planet, water is very scarce and the inhabitants suffer from perpetual thirst. Then he argued, on the basis of his observation, that the deity who could tolerate such conditions in Mars might regard with complacency the same state of affairs on this earth. Then he began half-consciously to visualize the state of this earth when everybody would be suffering from thirst. And so the process of morbid brain activity went on until he became a nervous wreck. Had he realized just what he was doing, the morbid process would have been nipped in the bud by a hearty laugh. Many disorders spring from a tendency to dwell upon morbid fancies, the product of an undisciplined imagination. Hence, many nervous sufferers suffer not from the disease which they imagine themselves to have, but from a disease of a drifting, uncontrolled imagination. The hypochondriac, for example, who, conscious of some pain in the back, arrives suddenly at the fixed belief that he is suffering from kidney disease, is not really suffering from this disorder, but it is in truth the victim of a powerful autosuggestion. Or again, take some types of stammerers. Frequently, we observe that when the stammerer is engrossed in a subject or has his mind diverted for the moment from his weakness, he speaks fluently and easily. But when he recalls his trouble and is seized with the fear that he is about to stammer, then he begins to stammer. Here, the stammering has a pure psychical origin. he is the victim of an autosuggestion. Or take the fear which goes by the name of stage fright. The sufferer is possessed, he knows not how or why, with the idea that when he ascends the platform or the pulpit to deliver his lecture or sermon, he will become nervous and perhaps lose the thread of his discourse and suffer the humiliation of a breakdown. Remove this apprehension from his mind, and he stands up calm and self-possessed and utters his words with freedom and ease. This is a type of an isolated fear, which may arise in an otherwise well-balanced and healthy mind. A thought which is the subconscious creation of our own minds may lead us into error concerning even the existence of a fact, and may thus give rise to a purely suggested sensation. It is well known, for example, that in answer to hypnotic suggestion, following only, of course, upon the deeper hypnotic states, a man may become paralyzed, or he may experience a headache, or he may be cured, for the time at least, of the most excruciating agony. So too, by sheer self-suggestion, he may unconsciously produce a pain in any part of his organism, or he may derange his digestion, or he may deepen a sense of fatigue, or he may lose the power of speech. The idea, once originated, acts, as Charcot says, like a parasite and exercises an influence over the whole mental realm and even over the physiological functions. We know that in neurasthenia, or as it is popularly called, nervous prostration, self-suggestion plays a great role. The neurasthenic seems often in a state of utter exhaustion, yet the breathing is normal, the pulse is regular, the muscles are well developed, and there is no trace of paralysis or of real muscular fatigue or weakness. He will tell you that he cannot lift the smallest weight without a sense of fatigue. Yet if you divert his mind from the particular movement, you will soon discover that he is capable of a great amount of physical exertion along other lines. His sense of fatigue is owing to the intervention of an autosuggestion quite unrecognized by the patient. It is what is known as a habit fatigue, a sort of false fatigue which differs from normal, healthy fatigue in that it is not helped as a rule by rest. The truth is, the neurasthenic, when he is about to put forth an effort, expects to be fatigued. And this very expectation brings about the sense of exhaustion. It is another illustration of the power of expectant attention. Dubois, the Swiss specialist, tells of a patient whose trouble started in this way. On one occasion, it was his duty to carry some potted geraniums to another flower border in the garden where he was at work. Following this effort, he was taken with an agonizing cramp in the region of his stomach. He soon discovered the reason of this strange sensation. It was the red of the geraniums which brought it on. That was his theory, and he found confirmation of this theory in the fact that ever afterwards bright red always produced this effect upon him, and the reaction was just in proportion to the intensity of the red, that if he took up a book with red edges, the sensation of pain grew to its maximum when the book was closed, and decreased if the intensity of the color was lessened by turning the leaves over. Dubois pointed out to him that he was simply the victim of an autosuggestion. Possibly cramp came on the day he first felt it through the attitude of bending the body or through some physical fatigue, or perhaps because he had eaten something that had disagreed with him. One could not tell exactly what was the cause. It could not have been the red color, however, that made such an impression upon his organs and caused the sensation, because there is no inherent connection between any color and stomach cramp. That the red always acted in the same way afterwards did not prove anything. He was suffering from the effect of an autosuggestion, and as a mental suggestion creates a sensation just as long as it is not dissipated by a contrary autosuggestion. So the patient had remained under the power of his self-produced trouble until he understood its modus operandi, the source of its hold on him. This brought to light began his cure. It is well to remember that autosuggestion can in many instances cure as well as create nervous disorder. Its restorative powers, indeed, are limited, and often it can produce mischiefs which it seems powerless to heal. In these cases, suggestion offered by another or some other psychotherapeutic procedure is necessary. For example, experience leads us to deny its utility in the morbid impulses and strange abnormal sensations characteristic of psychasthenia. And no amount of self-suggestion will restore to the sufferer a sense of the reality of the world or of the concreteness of events. Dread of open spaces, agoraphobia, says Moll, is nothing but an autosuggestion. The patient in this case is possessed by the idea that he cannot step across some open space. No reasoning is of avail here. The patient acknowledges its justice without permitting it to influence him, because his autosuggestion is too powerful. As a rule, logic is for the most part powerless over these autosuggestions. The cure lies in a process of re-education administered by skilled experts in a psychological medicine. It is powerless, too, for the most part, against drug addictions, those moral mischiefs that root themselves profoundly in the mental and moral mechanisms. The reason is that the psychical powers are too much involved in the given disorder to admit of the formation of good autosuggestion. On the other hand, it would be a mistake to deny, as some writers do, its value in certain milder forms of trouble. It has special significance when the condition of the nervous sufferer is balanced between the normal and the abnormal, so that good self-suggestion offered systematically and with belief may succeed in tipping the scales in the right direction. As a well-known English physician puts it, a man outside a baker's shop may be just balanced between stealing or not. Hunger prompts the one way, principle the other. Now, if an emotion idea is presented to his mind of his starving family at home, he takes a loaf and becomes a thief. If, on the other hand, a vision of prison or the verse, "Thou shalt not steal," rises forcibly in his brain, he walks away. In the same way, in many nerve affections, a comparatively slight self-suggestion will enable us to do what we otherwise could not, and so overcome some nervous dread. For instance, a person with some unreasonable fear that is poisoning his life may, besides removing any contributing cause, and besides combating it with his willpower, actively employ autosuggestion by bringing his reason to bear on it, and show its folly to himself by saying aloud at the most impressionable time, when just awakening or falling asleep, how unreasonable the fear is, by thinking similar thoughts, by seeing in print the folly of his fears described, and by hearing others say the same. There are exceptional cases on record in which a profound upheaval of the subconscious life has been able to effect revolutions in habit and character which were beyond the scope, apparently, of any method that could appeal to the ordinary consciousness. A medical writer has recently published a story for the authenticity of which he vouches. It was the case of a young man who had contracted the morphine habit. As is well known, morphinism is one of the most tenacious of moral slaveries and is exceedingly difficult to break up. This young man was devoted to his mother, who had been dead for some time. One night, he had an exceedingly vivid dream, in which she appeared to him with all the verisimilitude of life. She sat by his bedside, the tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice broken with sobs, as she implored him to give up the habit that was ruining his life. So vivid was the dream, and so profound was the impression it made upon his mind, that he awoke, and, rising from his bed, he took the bottle containing the drug and the morphine syringe, and breaking them in pieces, he from that moment experienced deliverance. Nor had there been any relapse up to a few months ago, when the incident was brought to my knowledge. But of course such incidents are rare and cannot be commanded at will. Their occurrence depends upon subtle and inexplicable and, so to say, accidental causes. Nevertheless, they do show that sometimes the subconscious element in mind, when profoundly moved, is capable of working wonders which, apparently, are not possible to the normal waking consciousness. It is more useful, however, to reflect that there are certain minor troubles against which self-suggestion, which is within our control, is powerful, and it is about its curative influence on these that I now pass on to speak. We know that certain types of pain are amenable to self-suggestion. Pascal is said to have cured himself of a severe toothache by applying his mind to the solution of a mathematical problem. During the passive state of reflection, his attention had ceased to sustain the painful sensation which he had experienced, and hence the pain disappeared. Immanuel Kant was subject to oppressive palpitations of the heart, but he triumphed over his misery by transferring his attention to intellectual work. He was able to put himself very quickly into a somnolent condition, which enabled him, while concentrating his mind, to lose consciousness of his physical sensation. And in our own time, Professor Forel of Zurich reports that though he has suffered for the last 6 years from ringing in the ears caused by a chronic dry catarrh of the middle ear, yet he has succeeded in diverting his attention so completely from it that, as a rule, he no longer hears it except when he thinks directly of it through association. My colleague, Reverend Dr. Worcester, tells me that by self-suggestion he has cured a recurrent headache, and other instances of the same kind have come to my knowledge. There is a headache which is mainly physical in character and may be called a habit headache, which arises through a kind of mental reverberation of past experience. Against such pain, autosuggestion is of distinct value. So too with constipation, not dependent on organic disease. It is well known that many persons suffer from constipation originating in autosuggestion and perpetuated by the continual use of laxatives, which interfere with the automatism of the central nervous system and the normal intervention of the bowels. In this case, what autosuggestion causes, it can also cure. From a letter which lies before me and which was written by a sufferer from this trouble, I quote these sentences. I have done something for myself through autosuggestion. I have practiced this faithfully now for over 6 months and have cured my constipation and have practically cured my sleeplessness. And this statement is typical of many others. Or take worry, which is simply a vicious mental habit kept up by vicious self-suggestion. Dr. Salaby calls it the disease of the age, and certainly 90% of nervous sufferers complain of this mental misery. Said one of these sufferers to me once, I worry about small things, and I worry about great, and then I worry because I worry. Where the worry is not the symptom of some profound mental disturbance, it can be met and mastered by the worrier. Of course, it is useless to say to oneself, don't worry, and especially is it useless to utter this negative with vehemence and impatience. This style of dealing with the trouble will only intensify it. The better plan is to wait until one is in a relaxed, calm, and passive state, as in the minutes that immediately precede falling asleep, and then gently impress upon the mind the idea that on awakening the mind will be at perfect peace with itself, full of hope and harmony. One who has suffered much from worry and depression of spirits writes to me as follows. I have been using autosuggestion for the eradication of depression and to correct defects of character. It may seem amusing to you that a man of 64 should begin at that late day to correct defects of character, but I am surprised and pleased to note that I am making progress. I am actually startled sometimes at the vividness and clearness with which the suggestion given at night come into the mind during the day when I am engrossed in business matters. It actually seems at times as though a voice from the sky spoke to me. From my own experience, I believe anyone of ordinary intelligence and persistency can re-educate or make himself over. Mr. Charles G. Leyland of Hans Britten Ballads fame tells us how he overcame in this way both false fatigue and worry. He had read in works on hypnotism how patients were made to believe that they were monkeys or madmen or umbrellas or criminals at will. Then the thought occurred to him that he might develop this power for his own moral benefit. He suggested to himself while in a somnolent condition that he should apply himself to literary or artistic labor without once feeling fatigue. His suggestions, he found, were realized, though he was a man of advanced years and therefore, presumably, more easily tired. His next step was to will that he should all the next day be free from any nervous or mental worry, that he should preserve a hopeful, calm, well-balanced state of mind. He adds, I had my lapses, but withal I was simply astonished to find how my perseverance, habitual calm not only grew on me, but how decidedly it increased. I most assuredly have experienced it to such a degree as to marvel that the method is not more employed as a cure for nervous suffering and insomnia. Mr. Leyland wrote those words about 10 years ago. Much has happened since then, and now the psychologically trained physician preaches the virtue of self-suggestion to the unhappy victim of worry, lack of self-confidence, or of nervous irritability, ultra self-confessions, stage fright, physical fatigue, and insomnia. Formulate and silently repeat some such proposition as this. Tomorrow I shall awake with a free, clear conscience, glad in the thought that I can do whatever work Providence assigns me. I will, therefore, be happy and cheerful. I will be master of myself. I will not only be happy myself, but will seek to make others happy. Before many weeks have passed, you will be conscious of a change. Worry will begin to loosen its grip. Everything will take on a happier guise, and the whole personality will be lifted to a new level of freedom and efficiency. Especially is its value to be emphasized in bad or broken sleep. Much of the curse of insomnia is due to the belief or to the fear of the sufferer that he cannot sleep. Once his apprehension is broken down, he sleeps. It is not so much the insomnia as the worry about the insomnia that does the mischief. Hence, the sufferer will do well if he suggests to himself and repeats the suggestion over and over again. If I sleep well, if I do not sleep well, I will at least gain rest by keeping my mind calm and my body relaxed. Whether we sleep depends on the state of mind with which we go to bed. If we allow the cares and worries of the day to haunt our pillow, then we need hardly expect to sleep. Mr. Gladstone was once asked if the fate of some parliamentary bill which absorbed his attention did not obtrude itself in the hours of rest. He replied sensibly, "No, what good would that do?" Men who have performed great tasks have performed them largely through their ability to dismiss care and anxiety from their minds when it was safe for them to do so. As illustrating the influence of self-suggestion in producing sleep, Dr. George L. Walton, the Boston neurologist, recommends the following experiments. First, place yourself on the face and from this point turn rapidly in a complete circle backwards from right to left until you're again on the face. Pause several times and say to yourself rapidly, "I cannot sleep in this position." The result of the experiment is practically uniform. The rapid movement and the suggestion prevent sleep. Secondly, start in the same position as in the first experiment. Traverse the same circle, prolonging each pause with body relaxed, and substituting at each pause the suggestion, "I can sleep in any position." Repeat it a number of times deliberately and as if you meant it. The restful pause and the suggestion generally induce sleep long before the circle is completed. In a word, the secret of getting sleep is to assume the external physical attitude which corresponds to sleep, to relax every muscle, and let it stay relaxed, to breathe lightly and regularly, to call up the image of a sleeping person, to talk and think sleep to oneself, to repeat silently and in a quiet, dreamy fashion such a formula as this: "There is no reason why I should not sleep. Therefore I can sleep. Therefore I shall sleep. My body is relaxed. My mind is at peace. Sleep is coming. I am getting sleepy. I'm about to sleep. I am asleep." There are many who groan under the burden of evil and degrading habits of mind, of body, or of both, and their cry, "O wretched man that I am," is seldom heard with sympathy or insight. One peculiar form of mental misery afflicts many nervous people. They are obsessed with thoughts which they abhor, thoughts that seem to them unutterably degrading, but which, try as they will, they cannot get rid of. Sometimes such sufferers become melancholy and depressed and even imagine that they are in a hopeless condition morally and spiritually. They try by recreation or change of scene or by sinking themselves in some piece of hard work or by prayer and reading religious books to get relief from the insistent and recurring idea. But the moment the mind is at liberty, off it flies to the forbidden object. What are such sufferers to do? Richard Baxter, the Puritan divine of the 17th century, has written words of wisdom on this subject which ought to comfort those haunted with ideas they recognize to be wrong. Though we cannot, he says, in many cases think always of what we would, nay, though we cannot hinder abundance of thoughts from coming into our minds against our will, yet it is always in our power to assent to our thoughts or to deny our consent to them. If we do not consent to them so soon as we are aware of them, there is no harm done. Should we be haunted with blasphemous thoughts and cannot get rid of them, we must consider that our thoughts are no further ours than as we choose them. That all sin lies in the will, and all will implies choice. That those thoughts, therefore, which are not our choice, which we reject with a settled aversion and abhorrence, will never be placed to our account. Notwithstanding what I have hitherto said concerning the diligence with which we are to keep our hearts, yet this is always to be remembered, that with our diligence we must be careful to join discretion. My meaning is this: we must have a care not to extend our thoughts immoderately and more than our tempers will bear, even to the best things, and the way to do that is not to put them too much or too long upon the stretch at any one time, but to relax them when there is occasion and to let them run out and entertain themselves upon anything that comes to hand, so long as it is innocent. We now know that Baxter did not know that by saturating the mind with good self-suggestions, when body and mind are in a relaxed condition, the force of these vicious self-suggestions can be vanquished. Those who are troubled with mental obsessions of a painful and shameful character ought to reflect that they are suffering from a morbid condition of the mind, and that there are energies, moral and psychical, within themselves, which once released will sweep away inhibiting weaknesses, wretchedness, peccancies, and which will unify and harmonize their inner world. And one of the means by which these forces may be released is self-suggestion. Here I would call attention to the close connection between self-suggestion and prayer. When persons go into a house of worship, says Dr. R.C. Cabot, put themselves into a time-honored habitual position, relax themselves, turn away their minds and their intention from all outside cares and thoughts, and make themselves, so far as they can, receptive to the truth that is to be spoken to them and by their own lips. I do not see how we can fail to see that something is going on akin to what I have called suggestion in the relaxed condition. And this, of course, does not explain the mystery of prayer, nor does it cover all that is meant by prayer. For self-suggestion is itself a mystery, and appears to point to some wider self of which our ordinary, everyday self is but a fragment. But it does make intelligible to us the established fact that prayer works reflex benefits in the mind of him who prays, such as the feeling of strength, power, peace, and insight into the course of action to be pursued. It is significant that many men of action, such as Muhammad, Luther, Gladstone, and General Gordon, have been men of prayer. We must remember, however, that if we would have the reflex benefits of prayer, we must believe that he to whom we pray is, and that he is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. If prayer were believed to be only self-suggestive or reflex, few would be found to keep up the practice. The two great principles on which the method I have been expounding is based are first, the unity of mind and body, in virtue of which mental and nervous states are parallel and proportional, so that, for example, not the slightest feeling or thought can exist without, at the same time, a change, small or great, in the physical organism. And secondly, the complexity of mind, involving as it does elements that are conscious and elements that are unconscious or subconscious. Now, the older psychologists made mind and consciousness practically coterminous, whereas modern students regard consciousness as only one of the manifestations of mind. There is a great region of mind that lies below or outside the sphere of consciousness. This is variously named the subconscious, the subliminal, or the transliminal. Some go so far as to make personality dual and speak about we're having two selves, an objective and a subjective. We need not commit ourselves to such a doctrine. Enough to say that one and the same mind has a subconscious region of activity. Any mental experience which cannot be voluntarily recalled or reproduced, but which may be reproduced through the special devices, is a subconscious or a disassociated experience. To the belief that there is such a subconscious region of mind, the following writers, among others, have given their adherence: O.W. Holmes, Francis Galton, Hacktuch, Ribbett, W.B. Carpenter, Wundt Fechner, Paulson, Janet, Burrell, Freud, Jastrow, Stanley Hall, Cariot, Morton Prince, Sidis, J.J. Putnam, and James. But our everyday experience makes the quotation of authorities needless. You resolve to awaken at a certain hour determined on before going to sleep. Sure enough, about the given time you open your eyes. What internal clock sprang its alarm at the given moment? Or take the familiar difficulty of recalling a name. We rack our brains to find the forgotten word, but to no purpose. When we cease from our efforts and turn to something else, suddenly the name flashes on us without any apparent reason, and we wonder at the experience. The state of abstraction produced by turning to something else is the device by which the name flashed into the consciousness. In psychological terms, the disassociated name has become synthesized. Everyday abstraction is a type of normal dissociation of consciousness. Doubtless the explanation is that in the endeavor to find the name, a subconscious process is set up, which, acting automatically, in due time, stirs into consciousness what we seek to know. Many of our choices, which we regard as self-caused or accidental, are really the fruit of, it may be, a long and complicated series of subconscious processes, which, because they are subconscious, hide from us the real causes of our acts. This is one of the proofs of subconscious activity in everyday life. The influences which determine us to take one of two paths equally convenient for bringing us to some point we desire to reach are often hidden in the subconscious realm. And if we were asked to state the reasons for our choice, we would almost infallibly give the wrong ones. Or take the phenomena of dreams. Here we are wholly in the region of the subconscious. Certain organic sensations of a morbid kind give rise subconsciously to dreams that, in the light of after events, seem strangely prophetic. The physician often gains valuable hints in this way as to the nature of the disease that is now beginning obscurely to declare itself. Popular thought is prone to regard some dreams as if there were something supernatural about them. You dream, for example, a strange and thrilling drama of battle, murder, and sudden death. One of the actors is a man whom you have never seen in your conscious life. A few days later, the man takes a seat beside you in a theater or church. You are struck with amazement and know not what to think. As a matter of fact, however, upon inquiry, you discover that you have passed this individual on your way to your office regularly every morning for a considerable period without, however, consciously recognizing him. Your eye, falling upon him while perhaps you were abstracted, thinking of other things, conveyed no conscious impression to the mind, but it did convey a subconscious or subattentive one. And in the subconscious dreaming state, this impression was reproduced. Now, there is a large class of physiological processes which are under the control not of the conscious, but of the subconscious mind. Such processes, for example, as those of the circulation of the blood, the assimilation of food, the peristaltic action of the bowels, the secretion of the glands, and in general, the vital chemistries of the body. It is the subconscious that controls the action of the vital organs, regulates the healthy rhythm of the forces of life, and reins in the mental and moral region where habit has the seat of its strength. If we can, in some way, reach the subconscious so as to enlist its powers in the interest of health, it is obvious that we have made a great step forward in the restoration of nervous balance and self-control. And that we can do in a measure in the few minutes preceding sleep. The psychological basis of the method which I have expounded is that, as we now know, every one of us, in passing from the waking to the sleeping state, or from the sleeping to the waking state, must pass through an intermediary condition, half sleeping and half waking. The hypnagogic state, as the psychologists call it. This intermediary or transitional state is semi-hypnotic in character. Simple suggestions formulated and repeated mentally in this condition are found by experiment to be powerful. No doubt, people differ in their mental constitution and in their measure of suggestibility, and so it happens that some do not react well to this method. Still, in the majority of cases, there would seem to be, as has been well said, some magic virtue in sleep, as if it preserved and ripened our wishes in ways unknown to us. We seem to be justified in asserting that auto-suggestion seriously, persistently, systematically, and skillfully applied can vanquish many of the smaller miseries of life that yet interfere with our happiness, can lessen or remove many inhibitions, can make available for use psychical energies and resources. Of course, what autosuggestion really is, how it is possible, and has already been said, no man knows. It is only in recent years that attention has been called to the relations of mind and body and to the psychological mechanism by which nervous disorders are produced and by which they are healed. When as much time and energy have been spent on the solution of these problems as has been given to the purely natural sciences, we may hope for discoveries that will astonish our minds and revolutionize our theories. Meantime, we need not wait for a full theory or philosophy of the method before applying it to the removal of semi-nervous and semi-moral troubles and to the restoration of that peace and self-control which form the secret of nervous health. Suggestion is much more valuable and powerful if it is reinforced and sustained by ideas that act in the full light of consciousness. When attempting to remove, for example, a false autosuggestion, say a fear of disease, we are far more likely to succeed if we do not content ourselves with injecting a new and more useful autosuggestion into the hidden stream of our subconscious life, but try also to explain how the harm arose and how similar mistakes can be avoided, not only by counter-suggestions, but by sidetracking the whole miserable affair and by letting a new interest occupy the mind. To crowd out fear by the heat of interest in new work or in our friends is also to give ourselves the best chance of receiving helpful suggestions by the way. Keeping in mind, therefore, this proviso, I venture to offer a few practical hints. 1. Except in purely moral and spiritual troubles, it is inadvisable to try to cure oneself by autosuggestion without, at the same time, benefiting by the advice of a physician. The physician, however, ought to be a man who has received a training in abnormal psychology. The physician who is preoccupied with physical and organic diseases, as a rule, has no time for delicate psychological analysis. He probably has never heard of strangulated emotions, unconscious automatisms, or disassociated states of consciousness. 2. The suggestions to be offered by one's self to oneself should be simple in character, consisting of a few brief, clear sentences. 3. It is better not to begin with a statement which your mind rejects as untrue, but to paint such an ideal condition as one may reasonably hope to realize in a short time. 4. The suggestions should be repeated, not with anxiety or with vehemence, but very gently, so that one may fall asleep while repeating them. 5. The more faith the subject has in the suggestive method, the better results he may expect. Therefore, he should first of all convince himself theoretically of the power of suggestion by reading a sound scientific discussion on the subject. 6. The sufferer ought not to allow himself to be discouraged by failure at first. Beginnings are always difficult, and especially is this true in the case of habits. Let him be patient and systematic in the use of self-suggestion, and he has every reason to hope for the dissipation of the milder nervous states or for the development of unsuspected moral and intellectual qualities. Emerson has said that the education of the will is the object of our existence. Self-suggestion is one of the most powerful agencies at our disposal for the development of willpower, and willpower is the secret of success, of true happiness, and of influence over our fellows. And now we have reached the end of the reading of the book titled The Power of Self-Suggestion by Reverend Samuel McComb. Hopefully this is something that will be of value to you and you can employ in your everyday life to continue to have the best quality of life. Please do hit like, share, and subscribe.